The black ship came from nowhere and stopped above Earth's moon like a giant metal mountain floating in space. Admiral Park Hae-on stood in the control room in Seoul, watching the screens with worried eyes. The ship was bigger than anything humans had ever built. It was longer than 10 football fields and taller than the biggest skyscraper in the world. For 3 whole days, the ship just stayed there. It did not move or make any sound or send any messages. Scientists from every country tried to talk to it. They sent radio signals in every language they knew. They even tried music and math, but the ship stayed quiet like a sleeping giant that might wake up at any moment. Inside the control room, people whispered and pointed at the screens. Some thought it was a good sign that aliens had finally come to Earth. Others were scared that the ship looked like it was built for war. The metal was black and smooth with no windows they could see. There were strange shapes on the sides that looked like they might be weapons. Then, on the 4th day, everything changed. Kim Nari was working at her computer trying to figure out what the ship was made of when suddenly she heard a voice inside her head. It was not her own thoughts, it was something else speaking directly into her brain. She dropped her coffee cup and it crashed on the floor, but she barely noticed because the voice was so clear and cold. But it was not just Kim Nari who heard it. Every single person on Earth heard the same voice. At the same time, a farmer in India stopped working in his field. A teacher in Brazil stopped writing on the blackboard. A child playing in a park in Canada stopped running and listened. The voice spoke in every language at once, somehow making perfect sense to everyone who heard it. The voice said it was Commander Vex from something called the Galactic Combat Federation. It sounded like a machine talking with no feelings at all. Commander Vex told them that Earth had been chosen for something called the Grand Arena Championship. This tournament would decide which planets deserved to be free and which planets would become slaves or be destroyed completely. Admiral Park Hae-on felt his heart beating fast as he understood what this meant. Every person in the control room stopped what they were doing and listened with growing fear. The alien was telling them that their entire world was now part of some kind of deadly game. Commander Vex explained that each world could send only one person to fight for everyone else. This one champion would have to pass 6 different tests. These tests would check if the champion was smart enough, strong enough, brave enough, and willing to keep fighting even when things looked hopeless. The alien said that 47 other planets had already sent their champions, and now it was Earth's turn. The worst part came next. Commander Vex told them they had only 72 hours to pick their champion and bring that person to coordinates in space just outside their solar system. If they did not send someone, or if their champion failed, then Earth would be processed for resources. That meant every human would die and their planet would be torn apart for metal and other materials. When Commander Vex finished talking, something even more terrible happened. Laughter, cold, cruel laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The alien was laughing at them like they were children trying to play a game meant for adults. The laughter went on and on until people wanted to cover their ears, but they could not block it out because it was happening inside their minds. Then Commander Vex spoke one more time with that same emotionless voice. The alien said they were looking forward to watching Earth's pathetic champion fail quickly. It would be amusing entertainment before they turned Earth into raw materials for their ships and cities. Then the voice stopped, and the terrible silence that followed was almost worse than the laughter. In the control room, chaos exploded like a bomb going off. Officers shouted questions at each other. Scientists pulled up star maps and tried to figure out where the coordinates were. Politicians grabbed phones and started making emergency calls too. World leaders, everyone was talking at once, but nobody had any answers. Admiral Park Hae-on stood in the middle of all this noise and confusion, but his mind was focused on one single thought. They needed to find someone who could represent all of humanity in what sounded like a fight for their lives. This was not about sending their best soldier or smartest scientist. This was about finding someone who would not give up even when facing impossible odds. Reports started coming in from military bases and government offices around the world. Every country was having the same emergency meetings. Every leader was asking the same question: who could possibly stand against alien champions from 47 different worlds and have any chance of winning? The debates went on for hours. Military generals wanted to send their toughest special forces soldier. They argued that only someone trained for combat could survive. What sounded like a series of deadly trial scientists insisted they should send their most brilliant researcher, someone who could think their way through complex problems. Politicians suggested sending a diplomat, someone skilled at negotiation who might find a peaceful solution. But, as more reports came in from every continent, one name kept appearing over and over again. Lite was not famous for being the strongest man on Earth. He was not the smartest person or the best fighter. He was known for something completely different 3 years ago when terrorists had taken hostages in a collapsed building in the city of Bizan. Every expert said rescue was impossible. The building was too damaged and too dangerous. Even the best rescue team said it could not be done, but Lite had refused to accept that answer. He had spent 14 hours crawling through the wreckage, ignoring orders to retreat when the building shook and threatened to collapse completely. He had found ways through spaces that seemed too small for a person to fit. He had lifted concrete blocks that should have been too heavy to move. When other rescuers gave up, he kept going. When the building caught fire, he kept going. When everyone said it was hopeless, he kept going. In the end, Lite had saved 43 people, including 12 children. When reporters asked him later how he had done the impossible, he had given a simple answer that became famous around the world. He said, "I kept trying until it worked." As Admiral Park Hae-un read the reports about Lite, he began to understand why this man's name kept coming up. It was not because he was superhuman or had special powers. It was because he had something that could not be taught or trained or measured. He had the kind of stubborn determination that refused to quit no matter how bad things looked outside the command center. The alien ship continued to wait in its silent orbit above the moon. It was counting down the hours until Earth had to make its choice. The beings inside that ship had probably already decided that humans were too primitive and weak to be worth worrying about. They were expecting Earth to send someone who would lose quickly and provide a few minutes of entertainment before the real work of destroying the planet began. But they did not understand humans the way they thought they did. They did not know about the kind of person who would spend 14 hours in a collapsing building to save people he had never met. They did not know about the spirit that had carried humanity through ice ages and wars and plagues and every other disaster that had tried to wipe them out. Admiral Park Hae-un made his decision. Earth would send Lite. Lite was lying under his old motorcycle in his small garage in Daegu City when the military trucks arrived outside. His hands were covered in grease and oil as he tried to fix the engine that had been giving him trouble for weeks. He heard the sound of heavy vehicles stopping, but did not think much of it until he heard boots marching in formation across the concrete floor. He rolled out from under the motorcycle and sat up, wiping his dirty hands on an old cloth rag. Admiral Park Hae-un stood in the doorway wearing his formal military uniform with several other officers behind him. Lite was exactly what people did not expect when they heard stories about the hero of Bizan. He was average height, maybe 35 years old, with calm brown eyes and the kind of face you might forget in a crowd. Admiral Park Hae-un walked forward and spoke in a serious voice. "Mr. Lee, your planet needs you." Lite listened without saying a word as Admiral Park explained everything that had happened. The giant alien ship above the moon, the terrible voice that had spoken to everyone on Earth, the tournament that would decide if humanity lived or died, the 72-hour deadline that was now down to less than 24 hours. When the Admiral finished talking, Lite was quiet for a long time. He looked down at his motorcycle, then at his greasy hands, then back at the Admiral. The garage was silent except for the sound of traffic passing by on the street outside. Finally, Lite asked Wan-Yi. He spoke quietly, like he always did. "I am not the strongest person on Earth. I am not the smartest. I cannot even speak alien languages." Captain Song Min, who had come with the Admiral, stepped forward. "Sir, we have run computer programs using information from your military service and what happened in Bizan. Every test shows the same result. You have something that cannot be measured or taught. You do not quit." Lite nodded slowly. He understood what they were really asking him to do. They did not need a superhero or a genius. They needed someone who would keep fighting when everything looked hopeless. Someone who would show the galaxy what humans were really made of when their backs were against the wall. "When do we leave?" he asked. The preparation that followed was like nothing Earth had ever tried before. In the next 20 hours, teams of scientists, engineers, and doctors worked without stopping. They could not make Lite stronger than alien champions who had grown up on worlds with different gravity. They could not make him smarter than beings whose brains had evolved for thousands of years longer than humans. But they could give him something else. Dr. Choi Yuna, who was Earth's best expert on how the human mind works, spent hours talking with Lite about mental preparation. The aliens expect us to be primitive and weak, she explained. They are probably right about our technology, but they do not understand how humans can adapt. We have survived everything our planet could throw at us by learning, changing, and refusing to accept defeat. Engineer Baesu worked on equipment for Lite. They could not match alien technology, but they could give him tools that showed human cleverness, a multi-tool that could be changed into different things depending on what he needed, a medical kit with supplies that could work in many different environments, simple things, but designed with the flexibility that had always been humanity's greatest strength. As the deadline got closer, Lite stood on the launch platform wearing a simple combat suit. The suit had patches showing the flags of every country on Earth. He carried no weapons because they did not know what would be allowed. Instead, he carried something more valuable: the hopes and determination of 8 billion humans who refused to go quietly into slavery or death. The transport ship that came for him was small and efficient. It looked nothing like the massive alien ship that still hung above the moon. As Earth got smaller below him, Lite looked back at the blue and white ball that held everything he had ever known or cared about. Then he turned toward the stars, ready to show the galaxy that humans might be weak and primitive, but they were also the most stubborn species that had ever lived. During the journey to the arena, Lite spent time learning basic alien languages and studying what little information Earth had about other species in the galaxy. Most of it was just guessing based on old radio signals and mathematical patterns, but it was better than nothing. The ship's computer showed him images of previous arena champions from other worlds, creatures with 4 arms and metal-skinned beings made of living crystal that could change their shape, gas clouds that could think and move, flying jellyfish the size of elephants, things that looked like giant spiders with too many eyes. Every single one of them looked more dangerous than any human, but Lite was not worried about looking dangerous. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous opponents were often the ones nobody expected to win, the ones who looked weak but refused to stay down no matter how many times they got knocked down. As the transport ship approached the arena, Lite checked his equipment one more time. Everything was simple and basic compared to what the other champions probably had, but it was human equipment made by human hands with human cleverness built into every part. He thought about the people back on Earth who were counting on him: Admiral Park Hyeon and his team working around the clock, Kim Nari monitoring alien signals, Dr. Choi Yuna probably worried sick about whether her mental preparation would be enough, Engineer Baesu hoping his simple tools would somehow be enough against advanced alien technology. Most of all, he thought about the 43 people he had pulled from the wreckage in Bizon. 3 years ago, everyone had said it was impossible to save them. The building was too damaged, the fire was too hot, the structure was too unstable. But Lite had not cared about what was impossible. He had cared about what was necessary. Now the entire human race was trapped in wreckage, and everyone was saying it was impossible to save them. The aliens were too advanced, the odds were too bad, the situation was too hopeless. But once again, Lite did not care about what was impossible. He only cared about what was necessary. The arena appeared ahead of them like a metal city floating in space, and Lite smiled quietly to himself. The aliens were about to learn something important about humans. They were about to discover that impossible and necessary were two completely different things. The Galactic combat arena was bigger than any city Lite had ever seen. It hung in space between 3 dying stars that burned red and orange like giant campfires. The arena was made from metal that seemed to shift colors as he watched it, sometimes silver, sometimes gold, sometimes black as space itself. The structure had its own gravity and atmosphere and was big enough to hold millions of beings. As Lite's transport ship got closer, he could see other ships arriving from different directions. Each one carried a champion from another world. Some ships looked like they were made of pure energy. Others looked like living creatures swimming through space. One ship appeared to be made entirely of ice that somehow did not melt even near the Burning stars, the docking bay where his ship landed was enormous with space for hundreds of different types of vehicles. Tay watched through the window as his ship was guided to a platform marked with Earth's coordinates when the door opened. He stepped into an environment that made his human senses struggle. The air was breathable but tasted like metal and electricity. Gravity was heavier than Earth normal, making each step require more effort, but it was the other champions that truly showed him how far from home he was. A creature that looked like it was made of living crystal stood 3 meters tall. Its surface reflected rainbow colors with every movement, and when it walked the floor shook under its weight. Something that looked like a giant spider made of metal clicked across the deck on 8 legs. Each of its many eyes tracked everything around it with mechanical precision. Being made of what seemed to be living shadow, flowed rather than walked its shape constantly. Changed from human-like to formless cloud to something with too many arms. Another champion looked like a tree that had learned to move with bark-like skin and branches instead of arms. Among all these incredible alien beings, Lite looked exactly like what he was, a human in a simple combat suit carrying basic equipment. He was completely outmatched in every obvious way. Look, one of the alien champions said in a voice like grinding stone. They actually sent someone the crystal. Being laughed, and the sound was like wind chimes in a storm. How precious the little mammals think they can compete. The spider creature clicked its metal parts together in what might have been amusement. I give it 5 minutes in the first trial. These carbon-based life forms break so easily. Lite said nothing. He had learned long ago that words were cheap when you were outmatched. Instead, he watched and learned the crystal being moved with confidence but seemed inflexible, always keeping the same basic shape. The spider creature was fast and clearly intelligent, but its movements followed patterns like a machine. The shadow being was the most unsettling because it had no fixed form, but even it seemed to have rules, staying close to darker areas and avoiding bright lights. The tree-like champion moved slowly, but its bark looked incredibly tough. More champions gathered in the docking bay. A floating jellyfish that pulsed with internal light, a humanoid covered in what looked like living metal armor, a creature that seemed to be made of pure electricity contained in a force field suit. Each one looked more dangerous and advanced than anything Earth had ever produced. A new voice cut through the alien chatter. Champions, follow me. The speaker looked somewhat human but had pale blue skin and 4 arms. I am Moderator Prime. You will be briefed on the trials and given time to prepare. The briefing hall was a circular room that could fit all 47 champions despite their vastly different sizes. Moderator Prime stood at the center, using his 4 arms to gesture as he spoke. His voice was translated into every language simultaneously. The Grand Arena Championship consists of 6 trials, he announced. Each trial eliminates the weakest champions until only one remains. The winner species advances to full galactic citizenship with all the benefits that brings. The losers face judgment based on their performance. Lite felt a chill run down his spine but kept his expression calm. Around him, alien champions shifted and whispered. Several glanced in his direction with what looked like amusement. Total failure results in planetary processing for resources. Moderator Prime continued without emotion. This means your world will be stripped of all useful materials and your species will cease to exist. Success in early trials, but overall failure results in slavery. Your people will serve the galactic community in whatever capacity we determine. The first trial begins in 6 hours. It will test your ability to survive in hostile environments while solving complex problems under extreme pressure. Champions who fail to complete the trial within the time limit will be eliminated permanently. There is no second chance. As the briefing ended and champions began to leave, Lite remained in his seat for a moment longer. 6 hours to prepare for a trial designed by beings who had mastered space travel before. Humans had invented farming, no pressure at all, but as he finally stood and walked toward the preparation chambers, Lite allowed himself a small smile. The aliens were right that humans were outmatched in almost every way. They just did not understand that being outmatched had never stopped humans before. In the preparation area, Lite found a small room assigned to him. It contained basic furniture and a computer terminal that could provide information about the arena's facilities. He spent time studying what he could about the other champions and the types of trials previous tournaments had used. Most of the information was restricted But he learned that trials typically tested different aspects of a species: capabilities, physical strength and endurance, mental problem-solving abilities, adaptability to changing conditions, leadership and cooperation, courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and finally the will to survive when everything seemed hopelessly. Tay smiled again as he read the list. It was like someone had written a description of human history. Every single one of these qualities was something humans had been forced to develop just to survive on their own planet. He checked his equipment one more time, the multi-tool that could be reconfigured for different purposes, the medical kit with supplies for various situations, the simple but flexible gear that represented human ingenuity. Everything was ready as the time for the first trial approached. Lite could hear the sounds of other champions preparing. Some were making loud roars or battle cries, others seemed to be performing complex rituals or calibrating advanced equipment. Tay sat quietly and thought about home. He thought about Admiral Park, Hyan and his team back on Earth, probably watching every signal they could detect from the arena. He thought about the billions of people going about their daily lives, not knowing that their entire future depended on what happened in the next few hours. Most of all, he thought about the lesson he had learned in Bizen 3 years ago. When everything looks impossible and everyone says you should give up, that is exactly when you have to keep trying. That is when you discover what you are really made of. A signal echoed through the preparation area indicating that the first trial would begin soon. Lite stood up, straightened his simple combat suit, and walked toward the arena entrance. Around him, alien champions were making final preparations, confident in their superior abilities and advanced technology. They had no idea they were about to face something that no amount of evolution or technology could prepare them for. They were about to face pure human stubbornness. The first trial arena materialized around the champions like a nightmare made real. Lite found himself standing on a narrow platform hanging in space, above an ocean of boiling acid that stretched to the horizon. The acid was bright green and sent up clouds of poisonous gas that made his suit's air filters work overtime. Above him, electrical storms raged across a red sky, sending down lightning bolts that struck platforms with devastating explosions. Trial 1: Environmental Adaptation and Problem-Solving. Moderator Prime's voice came from speakers hidden everywhere. You must reach the extraction point on the far side of the acid sea. The platforms will support your weight for exactly 90 seconds before dissolving. Lightning strikes follow predictable patterns that can be calculated. You have 4 hours. Begin. 47 champions stood on 47 platforms scattered across the deadly landscape. Immediately, several of the larger aliens began jumping between platforms. With impressive displays of strength and speed, the crystal beings' jumps created sonic booms that shook nearby platforms. The metal spider used cable-like webs to swing from platform to platform, the shadow being flowed across the gaps like smoke. Tay stood still for 30 seconds, watching the lightning strikes and studying how the platforms were arranged while other champions rushed forward using brute force or special abilities. He noticed something they were missing. The platforms were not placed randomly. They formed a pattern, but not the obvious zigzag path that most champions were following. He pulled out his multi-tool and quickly changed it into a measuring device. The lightning strikes were predictable, but not in the simple way most beings would expect. They followed a mathematical sequence based on prime numbers, striking platforms in an order that would eliminate anyone taking the most direct route, while stronger champions leaped across gaps that should have been impossible for a human. Lite took a different approach. He began moving in what looked like the least efficient direction, sometimes waiting on platforms as they started dissolving under his feet, timing his movements to avoid the lightning strikes. The human has lost his mind, laughed one of the alien champions, a lizard-like being with armor-plated skin. He is going backwards. But Lite was not going backwards. He was following the safe path that the trial designers had hidden beneath the obvious one. As platforms dissolved behind him and lightning eliminated champions who had chosen speed over observation, he methodically worked his way across the acid sea. 20 minutes into the trial, the first champion was eliminated. A bear-like creature with metal claws had tried to use brute force to jump gaps that were too wide, falling into the acid below with a scream that echoed across the arena. The screen showed 46 champions remaining. 30 minutes and 3 more were gone. The lightning had claimed two champions who had ignored the mathematical pattern, and another had made a calculation error and landed on a platform that could not support its weight. The acid sea now held the dissolved remains of four would-be champions. Li Te reached the halfway point as the trial entered its second hour. Around him, the surviving champions were beginning to realize that this was not simply a test of physical ability. Those who had relied purely on strength or speed were struggling as the platforms became smaller and the gaps wider, the crystal being, despite its initial confidence, was having trouble with the increasingly complex platform arrangements. Its rigid structure made it difficult to land on the smaller platforms, and it could not change its jumping technique as the trial became more demanding. Metal Spider was doing better using its multiple legs and web cables to navigate, but even it was struggling with the mathematical precision required to avoid the lightning strikes. Several times it had to abort jumps at the last second when it calculated the timing was wrong. Meanwhile, Li Te continued his steady progress. He was not the fastest or strongest champion, but he was still moving forward, while others had stopped to recalculate their routes or had been eliminated entirely. His human ability to adapt and solve problems under pressure was proving more valuable than raw power or advanced technology. As the third hour began, only 23 champions remained. The acid sea had claimed the rest, along with the precisely timed lightning strikes. Li Te could see the extraction point in the distance, a raised platform surrounded by blue light that indicated safety, but he also noticed something that made his heart sink. The remaining platforms between his position and the finish line were arranged in a pattern that would require perfect timing and coordination. Between multiple champions, this was not just a test of individual ability. It was a test of whether the survivors could work together when their species' survival was at stake. As if reading his thoughts, moderator Prime's voice filled the arena again. Champions, you have discovered the true nature of this trial. The final section requires cooperation. Only those who can coordinate with potential rivals will reach the extraction point. You have 1 hour remaining. Begin the final phase. Li Te looked around at the other surviving champions. Most of them were from species that had spent centuries conquering other worlds. Cooperation was not their strong point, but if they could not work together, they would all die in the acid sea and their worlds would be destroyed. The crystal being was the first to speak, its voice carrying across the deadly landscape. This is clearly a test of leadership. As the most advanced among us, I will coordinate the crossing. The Metal Spider's response came immediately and was full of anger. Advanced, your people still use primitive crystal matrices for computing. My species mastered quantum processing before your world had intelligent life. As the aliens argued about who should lead, Li Te noticed something alarming. The platforms were dissolving faster now, and the lightning strikes were becoming more frequent. The trial designers had built in time pressure that would force a quick decision. We have maybe 10 minutes before there are not enough platforms left to make this work, Li Te called out in the common galactic language he had learned during his journey to the arena. The shadow being flowed closer to his platform. When it spoke, its voice was like whispers in a dark room. The human speaks truth. But why should we trust a primitive species to participate in our survival? Li Te looked around at the remaining champions. Besides himself, there was the crystal being, the Metal Spider, the shadow being a floating jellyfish-like organism, and a humanoid with metallic skin. 6 champions total, exactly what they needed for the final crossing, because he said calmly, I have been watching this trial for 3 hours, and I know how to get us all across. But it only works if everyone follows the plan exactly. The metallic humanoid spoke for the first time, its voice like grinding gears. What makes you think a species that has not even achieved interstellar travel can understand a trial designed by the Galactic Federation? Instead of arguing, Li Te demonstrated. He pulled out his multi-tool, quickly configured it as a projection device, and showed them the mathematical pattern he had discovered. Not just the lightning strikes, but the platform stability algorithm, the timing sequences, and the precise coordination required for the final crossing. The Metal Spider was the first to understand. Its multiple eyes focused on the projection, and its mechanical parts clicked in what Li Te had learned was a sign of surprised respect. This pattern, it's a modified Thessarian sequence. How did a primitive species recognize Thessarian mathematics? We do not know what Thessarian mathematics is, Li Te replied. But humans are good at finding patterns. It's how we survived on a planet full of things trying to kill us, the crystal. Being studied the projection with growing amazement, you decoded this in real time under pressure while navigating the platforms. That is what humans do, Lite said simply. We adapt, the shadow being flowed between them, its form becoming slightly more solid. If his plan works, we all survive. If it fails, we all die together. There is a certain equality in that outcome. With time running out and platforms dissolving beneath their feet, the champions agreed to follow Lite's coordination. The jellyfish being would position itself at the center intersection, using its natural ability to float to maintain stability. The crystal being and metallic humanoid would form the main bridge supports. With their structural strength, the metal spider would use its web cables to provide additional support and quick repositioning between platforms. The shadow being would flow between platforms as needed to maintain balance, and Lite would time the entire sequence, calling out the movements needed to avoid lightning strikes while keeping the platform bridge stable. On my mark, Lite called out as they moved into position. Remember, this only works if we trust each other completely. The irony was not lost on any of them. 6 species that had never worked together, representing civilizations that had conquered countless worlds, now depending on a human's ability to coordinate their survival. The platforms continued dissolving around them, and the lightning strikes were coming faster. Now they had maybe 5 minutes before the mathematical window of opportunity closed forever. Mark, Lite shouted, and they began to move. The final crossing was like a deadly dance where one wrong step meant death for everyone. Lite called out commands in the Galactic language, his voice cutting through the sound of dissolving platforms and crackling lightning. Each champion moved exactly when and where he directed their survival, depending on split-second coordination. Jellyfish moved to Platform 7 Alpha. Now crystal, shift your weight left by 15 degrees. Spider, extend web support to Platform 9. The metallic humanoid was the most skeptical about following a human's orders, but even it had to admit that Lite's pattern recognition was perfect. Every movement he called out was timed exactly right to avoid the lightning strikes, while maintaining the structural integrity of their living bridge. As they reached the halfway point of the final section, disaster struck. The shadow being's platform began dissolving faster than expected, and it started to lose its solid form. Without that support point, the entire bridge would collapse, sending all 6 champions into the acid sea below. I cannot maintain form, the shadow being whispered urgently. The platform's dissolution is interfering with my molecular structure. This was not part of Lite's calculated plan, but as he had learned during the bison rescue, sometimes you had to make things up as you went along when lives were at stake. Spider, can you extend a web cable to Shadow's position? He called out. Negative. The distance is too great and the angle is wrong. Crystal, can you extend your structure knot without losing stability for the entire bridge? Lite looked at the dissolving platform, the struggling shadow being, and the impossible gap they still had to cross. Then he made a decision that would have seemed insane to any rational calculation. He jumped not toward the extraction point, but backward toward the shadow beings failing platform. As he landed, the platform's dissolution accelerated under the additional weight, but he had maybe 30 seconds before it completely disappeared. What are you doing? The metallic humanoid shouted. You have doomed us all. But Lite was already working with his multi-tool. In 15 seconds, he had turned it into an electromagnetic anchor point. Shadow, you said your molecular structure is being disrupted. Can you use this as a stabilization point? The shadow being flowed toward the device, and immediately its form became more solid. Yes, but how did you know this would work? I did not, Lite admitted as the platform continued dissolving beneath them. But humans are really good at making things up as we go along. With the shadow being stabilized, Lite called out new commands. Jellyfish, move to support position. Crystal, extend toward our platform. We are modifying the bridge. What followed was the most complex coordination sequence of the entire trial, using the shadow being's renewed stability and his own position as an additional anchor point. Lite guided the champions through a modified crossing pattern that no trial designer had ever anticipated. When the last champion reached the extraction point, 43 minutes had passed. They had only seconds to spare before the entire platform system dissolved completely. As the safe zone's blue light surrounded them, the 6 survivors stood in stunned silence. The Crystal being was the first to speak human Li Te of Earth that was the most illogical, impossible, and effective problem-solving I have ever witnessed. The metal spider clicked its parts in agreement. Your species lacks advanced technology, superior physical capabilities, or highly evolved intelligence. Yet you succeeded where others failed. How is this possible? Li Te looked back across the acid sea where the dissolved platforms had left no trace of the deadly trial. They had just survived because humans never had the option of being the strongest or the smartest. We learn to be the most stubborn. Instead, we do not quit and we do not leave anyone behind. The shadow being flowed closer, its form more solid than before. The other trials will be even more difficult. The remaining champions will not underestimate you again. Good, Li Te replied, checking his equipment and preparing for whatever came next. I was getting worried this might be too easy. As moderator Prime's voice announced the rest period before Trial 2, the 6 survivors found themselves looking at the human differently. He was still outmatched in every measurable way. He was still carrying primitive equipment and representing a species that had barely left its home solar system, but he had just proven something that would echo through the Galactic Federation for generations to come. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent is not the one with the best weapons or the strongest body or the most advanced technology. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who simply refuses to lose. Trial 2 took place in a maze that existed in multiple dimensions at the same time. Li Te found himself running through corridors that twisted and folded back on themselves, where up could become down without warning and walls might be solid in one moment and empty space in the next. The goal was simple: reach the center of the maze where a beacon of light marked the finish line. But simple did not mean easy. The maze was designed to test mental flexibility and the ability to think in ways that defied normal logic. Most species' brains were programmed to understand three-dimensional space. This maze required champions to navigate in 7 dimensions simultaneously. Li Te quickly realized that his human brain was actually an advantage. Here, humans had always been good at thinking outside the box, at finding creative solutions when normal logic failed, while other champions tried to map the maze using advanced mathematical formulas. Li Te simply followed his instincts. When a corridor seemed to lead nowhere, he tried walking backwards. When a wall looked solid, he tested whether he could walk through it. When gravity seemed to pull him down, he experimented with moving sideways. This approach that seemed random and primitive actually worked better than the complex calculations other champions were using. The crystal being became trapped in a recursive loop, trying to calculate the mathematical relationship between dimensions the metal spider's logical programming could not handle. The paradoxes built into the maze structure, but Li Te navigated through impossible spaces by accepting that impossible things could happen. He finished Trial 2 in 2nd place, right behind the shadow being whose formless nature allowed it to flow through dimensional barriers. The jellyfish being came in 3rd, followed by the metallic humanoid. The crystal being and metal spider were eliminated when they could not adapt their thinking to the maze's impossible geometry. 4 champions remained. Trial 3 was about leadership under pressure. Each champion was given command of a small army of robotic soldiers and tasked with capturing a strategic objective. The catch was that the robots were programmed to follow orders but had no initiative of their own. They would do exactly what they were told, but nothing more. This trial eliminated the metallic humanoid, whose species had always relied on individual strength rather than coordinating group efforts. The being simply could not understand how to use the strengths of multiple weaker units to achieve victory. Li Te won this trial easily. Humans had thousands of years of experience in warfare and leadership. His tactical thinking, combined with his ability to inspire loyalty even in artificial soldiers, gave him a decisive victory. The shadow being came 2nd, and the jellyfish being barely managed 3rd place. 3 champions remained. Trial 4 tested courage in the face of overwhelming terror. Each champion was placed alone in a simulation designed to trigger their species' deepest fears. The jellyfish being, whose species had evolved in peaceful ocean worlds, was overwhelmed by simulations of violence and predation. It was eliminated when it refused to continue fighting. Li Te faced simulations of everything humans feared most: darkness, filled with unseen predators, heights that made him dizzy, In closed spaces that triggered claustrophobia, the simulation even showed him visions of Earth being destroyed with everyone he cared about dying while he watched. Helplessly, but Li Te had learned something important during his military service and later in the Bisong rescue. Courage was not about not being afraid, courage was about being afraid and doing what was necessary anyway. He pushed through every simulation even when his hands shook and his heart pounded. Because giving up was not an option, two champions remained. Li Te and the Shadow Being Trial 5 was about sacrifice and moral choice. Each champion was presented with scenarios where they had to choose between their own survival and saving others. The shadow being, whose species had evolved as solitary hunters, could not understand why anyone would risk themselves for strangers. It was eliminated when it chose self-preservation over helping others. Li Te barely hesitated when faced with the same choices. Every scenario the trial presented was just another version of the Bisong building situations where someone needed help, and he could either risk everything to save them or walk away safely. He made the same choice every time one champion remained, but there was no celebration yet. The final trial was different from all the others. Li Te found himself back in the briefing hall facing Moderator Prime alone. The alien's forearms gestured as he spoke. Champion Li Te of Earth, you have survived the trials and proven your species' worthiness, but there is one final test. The trial of understanding. The hall around them dissolved, and Li Te found himself floating in space looking down at Earth. The blue and white planet looked so small and fragile from this distance. He could see the continents and oceans that held everything he had ever known or cared about. Moderator Prime appeared beside him, also floating in the cosmic void. Your species has shown remarkable qualities: adaptability, leadership, courage, stubbornness that borders on its hash. Part 1. The invitation arrives. The black ship came from nowhere and stopped above Earth's moon like a giant metal mountain floating in space. Admiral Park Hyon stood in the control room in Seoul, watching the screens with worried eyes. The ship was bigger than anything humans had ever built. It was longer than 10 football fields and taller than the biggest skyscraper in the world. For 3 whole days, the ship just stayed there. It did not move or make any sound or send any messages. Scientists from every country tried to talk to it. They sent radio signals in every language. They knew. They even tried music and math, but the ship stayed quiet like a sleeping giant that might wake up at any moment inside. The control room people whispered and pointed at the screens. Some thought it was a good sign that aliens had finally come to Earth. Others were scared that the ship looked like it was built for war. The metal was black and smooth, with no windows they could see. There were strange shapes on the sides that looked like they might be weapons. Then on the 4th day, everything changed. Kim Nari was working at her computer trying to figure out what the ship was made of, when suddenly she heard a voice inside her head. It was not her own thoughts. It was something else speaking directly into her brain. She dropped her coffee cup and it crashed on the floor. But she barely noticed because the voice was so clear and cold. But it was not just Kim Nari who heard it. Every single person on Earth heard the same voice at the same time. A farmer in India stopped working in his field. A teacher in Brazil stopped writing on the blackboard. A child playing in a park in Canada stopped running and listened. The voice spoke in every language at once, somehow making perfect sense to everyone who heard it. The voice said it was Commander Vex from something called the Galactic Combat Federation. It sounded like a machine talking with no feelings at all. Commander Vex told them that Earth had been chosen for something called the Grand Arena Championship. This tournament would decide which planets deserved to be free and which planets would become slaves or be destroyed completely. Admiral Park Han felt his heart beating fast as he understood what this meant. Every person in the control room stopped what they were doing and listened with growing fear. The alien was telling them that their entire world was now part of some kind of deadly game. Commander Vex explained that each world could send only one person to fight for everyone else. This one champion would have to pass 6 different tests. These tests would check if the champion was smart enough, strong enough, brave enough, and willing to keep fighting even when things looked hopeless. The alien said that 47 other planets had already sent their champions, and now it was Earth's turn. The worst part came next. Commander Vex told them they had only 72 hours to pick their champion and bring that person to coordinates in space, just outside their solar system. If they did not send someone, or if their champion failed, then Earth would be processed for resources. That meant every human would die, and their planet would be torn apart for metal and other materials when Commander Vex finished talking. Something even more terrible happened. Laughter, cold, cruel laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The alien was laughing at them like they were children trying to play a game meant for adults. The laughter went on and on until people wanted to cover their ears, but they could not block it out because it was happening inside their minds. Then Commander Vex spoke one more time with that same emotionless voice. The alien said they were looking forward to watching Earth's pathetic champion fail quickly. It would be amusing entertainment before they turned Earth into raw materials for their ships and cities. Then the voice stopped, and the terrible silence that followed was almost worse than the laughter in the control room. Chaos exploded like a bomb going off. Officers shouted questions at each other. Scientists pulled up star maps and tried to figure out where the coordinates were. Politicians grabbed phones and started making emergency calls to world leaders. Everyone was talking at once, but nobody had any answers. Admiral Park Hyon stood in the middle of all this noise and confusion, but his mind was focused on one single thought. They needed to find someone who could represent all of humanity in what sounded like a fight for their lives. This was not about sending their best soldier or smartest scientist. This was about finding someone who would not give up even when facing impossible odds. Reports started coming in from